Hey everybody, Tony D and Little Joan here with a late night hot take on the media and how they're handling this whole thing, really. And it's not just about the president having the beer virus, which is a big news story. And I just watched a press conference between the president's actual doctors, and there's a whole team of doctors taking care of him, as you can see, and the reporters who seem desperate to prove that he's dying or give us something, doc, give us something, we're a bunch of ravenous hyenas and we need meat. That's the way they act. Now, I've said before, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a lot of things, but I did graduate with a degree in communications, so I actually came up with people who went on to work inside the media. Now, I and am more comedic writer, narrative guy, so I didn't go down the news path, but I came up with people who did, and I took the same sort of courses they did, and I understand the basics of how to put together a news segment, how to check sources, and that sort of thing. I don't do it on a fairly regular basis, although I try to do some of that here, but and I'm not a journalist, but I understand how it works, and I understand how TV works, more importantly, and the media in general. And Tim Pool just did a big rant about this, and one of the things he was saying was how everything's being censored on the internet and how they should be regulated. That was something that was talked about during the TV era and the radio era through the FCC. And there was talk about regulating television and radio because things happened that upset people and caused all sorts of chaos. The problem is this. Once you start to regulate speech, inevitably, it will become politicized, and one party will exploit the laws and rules, whatever it is. Doesn't matter how good you write the rules, somebody somewhere is going to find a loophole, or they're just going to ignore part of it and reinterpret the words. We've seen that all through Washington. They just tell you, oh no, that word doesn't mean that. It means this. The Constitution is a living document. We don't have to follow it exactly. It evolves. So once you undermine the language, it doesn't matter how many rules you make. So I think regulating the internet is a terrible idea. And of course, I'm a libertarian too. We're very much against that. And Tim was saying, "Oh, you Republicans, you don't want to regulate Facebook and Twitter and all these guys." The problem is, and the problem started with protecting these companies in the first place. Their 230 protections, they violated continuously. 230 protection basically gives them the right to be a platform and not be sued because they're not publishers. The problem is they're editing. When you edit, you become a publisher. It's as simple as that. These platforms like Facebook and Twitter should lose their 230 protections, or the government certainly should threaten to pull their protection and say, nope, you're not a platform, you're a publisher. They should make that call. That is something they can do. Or you could just remove the 230 protections altogether and let people sue any platform. I mean, if you're going to publish something defamatory against anyone, then why shouldn't somebody have the ability to sue you? And there's all sorts of defamatory nonsense that's on the internet. If the rules or the TOS was more specific, it still wouldn't matter. People would still push defamatory information or stuff that was close enough that they could certainly get you caught up in a lawsuit. And yeah, these platforms would essentially collapse. Or they would create some sort of decentralized platform that they would have no control of, and there'd be nobody to sue. But it all comes back to what screwed this up in the beginning. Government. Government created the 230 protections, and now these companies hide behind it. They shouldn't be doing this. They're not platforms. They're editing constantly. If you edit one thing, it's different when you edit things that are illegal. Things that are illegal don't belong on any platform. If you threaten somebody, that's illegal. It goes. If you, post pictures of, illegal pictures, the kind I mean, those go immediately. There's no question about that. But all the other stuff, there are ways that these sites can modify themselves so those horrible things that they're so worried about never see the light of day anyway. They can rig the system like they do on Reddit. People on Reddit used to complain all the time. Oh my God, why is all this? Why is this here? And why is that there? On Reddit, you could vote things up and down. If you don't like it, you vote it down. It disappears eventually. If it goes down far enough, it just disappears off the page. It goes into oblivion. You never see it again. But that wasn't good enough for Reddit. So they had moderators, volunteers who go in and say, well, it's not good enough that everybody voted this down. I have to remove it. No, you could have modified the platform to say, go into negative votes. And if you get down to -5, poof, away goes your post or whatever. Whatever system you want to come up with. I remember when the Howard Stern show first got its message board. And Howard, back in the day, was one of the people who fought against censorship on radio and TV and to some extent the internet. And it was just a free-for-all on that forum, right? You've heard about all the outrageous stuff that was on the Howard Stern show back in the day. Well, the forum was 10 times worse. People were saying the craziest, spiciest things you can imagine. There was no moderation. None. And so what would happen is people who said things that were really out of line, people would just shout them down or, post on top of them nasty comments and push their comment down into oblivion. Or they would vote up other things. I don't think there was voting on the site, but they would comment on other things, and things that got more comments went up, and things that got fewer comments disappeared off the site, and that's kind of the way forums work. With a voting thing on Reddit, poof, some of that stuff would go, and quite frankly, people who post, say, incredibly racist things, they got shouted down by the rest of the forum because the rest of the forum was mostly Howard Stern fans who weren't, idiots. They were like, F you and get lost and blah, blah, blah. I can't say it, of course, because we're on YouTube, which is heavily censored. So, anyhow, in terms of, the media and their coverage of this, CNN and all these major news outlets have become just another stop on the internet. That's where they're headed. And as they shrink further and further towards that, they become more and more desperate to get people and regain their former audience. Their audience is just bleeding out. They can't get it back. It's impossible. How do you get somebody back how do you get somebody who's, early 20s, never really watched the news, watches stuff on their phone, watches reruns of their Office on the phone, and occasional movie, podcasts about video games and, porn. You have everything on the internet. Why would you watch one of the most boring channels in existence, CNN? And in response, CNN has tried to spice up their content. And it doesn't work unless they essentially lie to their audience or almost lie. And words are important. And I am a wordsmith. So I understand what they're doing. They craft things and use their words to draw you in. So one of the things they do with regard to the president is they'll lead a story with "a source says." Who is a source? A source can literally be anybody on the planet. A source could be the reporter himself. A source emailed me that the president is very sick. Could have emailed himself. That would technically be true. Now they could take it a little further. A source close to the White House. Well, what does that mean? Well, what it implies is someone who's works in the White House or is close to the administration, somebody who's there every day. What it could mean is a guy who is texting from inside the White House who's in the middle of a tour. I mean, that literally could be the interpretation. Because if you got into court after you got sued over some bad article, you could say, well, I had a source close to the White House. Oh, we're going to force you to divulge that source, which they would never do. But if they did, you could say, well, here he is. And he was in the White House when he texted that. So technically, he was close to the White House. I mean, these are the semantics that they play. Because ultimately, they know they won't be sued. And the important thing is they make the money. They get the viewers, they get the clicks, and that's it. Once they get them, nothing else matters. Nobody's going to go back and check this stuff. Who the hell goes back and checks this? Well, Tim Pool does sometimes, and he calls them out. But almost nobody ever listens, because by the time you call it out, it's 3 days later, and there's 10 other news stories that have come down the pike. And you just keep getting bombarded with news. Yeah, like, oh yeah, that was a lie. But eventually, as Tim Pool is fond of saying, there are many grains of sand in a heap. And slowly but surely, CNN has eroded away all its credibility. MSNBC, all these major news sources, and Fox too, they're eroding their credibility because enough people finally go, wait a minute, that doesn't sound right. Oh yeah, I heard that on CNN. Turned out not to be true. And as soon as you get burned enough, you eventually say, I can't trust that. I don't know why I'm watching this stupid show. I'm going to go elsewhere. You know, what's the difference between CNN? If CNN's wrong half the time and your friend sending your Facebook post is wrong about the same amount of time, if you watch me and I'm wrong about the same amount of time, what the hell's the difference where you get your information from at this point, right? You might as well get it from anywhere. I mean, you know, the whole point of watching the news was that the news used to vet things. And I remember what that process was because that's what I learned in college, that you had to get 2 confirmed sources in order to say, okay, this is probably true and we could print this story. 2 confirmed sources. Where do you get those? Well, they taught us how to go to the library and look things up in old newspapers when you had to use microfiche. Now it's the easiest thing in the world. You do a 2-second Google search, you punch in 3 or 4 different terms, and up pops your confirmation. But everybody's wise to that, and because these media outlets echo each other over and over again, they just wait until, you know, some half-assed news story hits the wire, let it get bounced around a little bit, and like, oh, okay, they reported it, and wait, yes, a second one reported. Okay, now I got 2. And they game the system that way. So, is it true? Well, it doesn't need to be true. They just need plausible deniability to say it. So once I have 2 sources, I can now say it, and if you call me on my terrible sourcing, I could say, well, I thought those sources were good. If you call me out that, you know, an anonymous source close to the White House, nobody can figure out who it is, you could say, well, I can't tell you my source. But it was a source. I mean, it was sourced, right? I mean, it all sounds good, and the purpose is it just has to sound good enough so I could get a catchy headline so you could skim the news as opposed to reading an article because nobody reads anything anymore, and you just get the idea. And once the idea is in your head, and half the time these media outlets are just merely validating their audience's opinion, they're often running to the next 10 things, and it doesn't matter that they lied to you. The only thing that matters now is because they're so desperate for ratings and clicks is that they service their audience. So if I do stand-up, I service the audience by getting laughs. in news, you're supposed to service the audience by giving them information. But the problem is, not all information is interesting. Not all information will give you high ratings. And not all information is what I want to hear, although I might need to hear it. Consequently, when they say you should serve the audience in news, what ends up happening is you're just validating their half-ass opinions, even though their opinions might be wrong, or they've been misled, or you're totally making up a story or exaggerating it. See, that's one of the things they do too. It's not that they lie outright. They don't want to lie. They'll never lie and make up something so outrageous that they could be proven wrong. They'll just lie as long as they have the plausible deniability to cover them. So that's why they can bandy about all these anonymous sources and then lie to you. And it's just like, well, I got sources. I don't know what you heard, but that's what I heard. So what do? Well, you don't trust the news anymore. You got to listen to their rundown. So when they say an anonymous source close to the White House, it's BS. It's absolutely BS. And don't get me wrong, there were some anonymous sources that actually broke stories, right? There was Watergate, Deep Throat. But the thing about that is the way journalists used to use anonymous sources is they would get some sort of story. Some anonymous source would give them a hot tip like, I think the mayor is embezzling funds from, let's say, a pool project, a public pool project. They're building a pool. So then you call up the mayor's office and start asking a bunch of questions. Well, at first, everybody denies it, but the next thing you know, the mayor's coming out making statements about the pool project and how it's run into some cost overruns. And suddenly everybody's investigating the pool project. See, that's the way. It's sort of like when cops use their knowledge of criminals whom they're investigating to get them to confess or get them to make a mistake. That's the way you kind of use anonymous sourcing sometimes. You use the information they have to get at the confirmation you need to explain something for real. You don't just give it to the audience and say, well, here, you figure it out. They're not the ones who are doing the investigating. You are. And you're supposed to complete the investigation, not like get 3 quotes and go, well, this is an article, and slap it together and put it out on the internet. But that's exactly what they're doing now. They get a couple of little tidbits, a couple of crumbs here and there. Oh, this sounds good. I can imply this, this, and this. I got plausible deniability. You can pretty much say whatever you want. Like the president's dying, despite the fact his entire staff of doctors say, hey, he's doing fine, he's doing great. He'll probably be out of here in a few days or whatever. That's basically what they said. They wouldn't give a time frame when the president would get out, but they said he's doing well. He doesn't have a fever anymore. He's probably just tired. A guy works like a maniac. He probably got a little sick. It happens to the best of us. So, I hope the president recovers. But, as for the media, it's just so bad right now. And you really have to look for people, like Tim Pool, who really put time and effort into things and come through consistently with good stories. CNN wasn't always bad. When it first started, it was pretty good. It was pretty standard news organization. It was on TV. It was the 80s. You didn't have a lot of choices. You didn't have the internet, but CNN was decent. But they couldn't sustain a 24-hour news cycle. They just can't sustain it. They can't get the ratings. They quickly discovered that any outrageous news story, anything that, the war or things that were tragic, they would get all the highest ratings. That's how they would make their money. And over the years, they kept gravitating closer and closer and closer and closer. And then the internet just absolutely destroyed them because who the hell? I mean, do you go search for, let me watch a CNN show from 3 days ago on YouTube? No. Who would watch that? Like, who would watch an old episode of, The Situation Room with Wolf Blitzer? I mean, you don't watch, news like that. It's topical, it happens that day, and then it's dead forever. Uh, Pretty much. I mean, unless you're doing a documentary or something. But even then, it's like, if it's a slow news day, Wolf Blitzer's standing in the Situation Room twiddling his thumbs, and you're like, well, this is boring. I'm going to go watch anything else. But if the president is dying, if there's a war, if there's a disease that you could catch and drop dead, well, you're going to turn on the damn news and say, what the hell happened? If somebody's shot, you're going to turn on the news. What the hell happened? That's what the news has become. It's just become a reactionary clickbait National Enquirer nightmare. So anyway, that's my rant. I hope you enjoyed it. Little Jones fast asleep. She had a big day.